Thank you for joining us for today's panel. This is the first of two. And if you don't know where you're at, it is Community Day, and you should stick around because it's going to be interesting if you somehow ended up being that knowing what it was. And I am from Manchester. I am the director of the Center for Research and Accessible Technology and Experiences. And I think I skipped the E. But anyway, we call it CREATE. I'm just going to go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. Hopefully, most will know just kidding. Gisette, do you want to go next?
Yes, okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Gisette Johnson. I'm a postdoc here at CREATE within the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. My work focuses on designing and studying technology that enable trust, safety, and just understanding how people engage with AI and technology, especially within the health and social context. I primarily focus with people who are cognitively disabled, specifically people with dementia, as well as those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I do have two current studies with those diagnoses, but I'm very specific with these ones.
Thank you, Gisette. How would you like to go next? Is a little different.
I'm still very I'm faculty here at the School of Social Work at the UW, and I'm a social gerontologist, which means I'm interested in aging and older adults. So I've been studying older adults' experiences with new technologies that are specifically used for support care since 2010, and back then it was passive sensing and location tracking and web cameras, and now it's all of those things plus maybe audio and other data incorporated into AI products like AI cameras and companions. And I study ethical issues, but I didn't set out to study ethical issues, but that's what surfaces when you talk to people about these new socio-technical practices. So serious implications for privacy and autonomy and dignity, and even what can mean their field and access to the various supports, as well as what kinds of opportunities technologies might open or foreclose for care. So I look at ethics from a very applied perspective. I think teaching in school for sure keeps me very applied. People ask, okay, that's all great, but what do I do in this resource scarcity environment where can I make a decision now? So that's where I've made a focus on intervention research to learn how to move barriers to inform consent or share decision making about tech use, and not specifically with people with anything clicking on permanent dementia. And so I do both intervention research to address ethical issues at the interpersonal level around decision making, and also at the sort of macro issues related to broader power dynamics, including AI harms over adults, as well as the urgent need for meaningful governance. Since this is on the topic of disability, I just want to point out the obvious that some older adults have lived their whole lives with disabilities and might embrace disability as a cultural and political identity, and some have acquired disabilities that don't identify with that label, and some are living with dementia, which is normally but sometimes talked about as disability. And just the last thing I want to say is that people over 65, about 210, often get lumped into this category of the older adult population. But as a group that is highly diverse and spanning multiple generations, right, that are your shared generation. So I just want to note that almost any sentence that starts with older adults is going to be an overgeneralization, and that includes anything that I say.
Thank you for a helpful introduction, both to the topic and yourself. Ariana, do you want to go, well, actually, you have a question. We're going in order of distance, so think of those questions.
Okay, I'm going to close the door, but
Seattle.
Okay. I am Will Williams. I'm an assistant professor at Purdue University. I study disability technology and politics, where I do education of technology designers and developers. I try to teach them to say no to build and development things. I write about technology and eugenics and have a book on AI and eugenics. People dislike it when I write about those things. That's
Thank you, Will. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana Abalasia. I'm an attorney. I currently lead the Disability Rights and Tech Policy Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. CDT is a nonprofit civil society organization based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., so the other Washington. And most of my work focuses on the ways in which AI and other emerging technologies impact people with disabilities. Um, a lot of my work is related to policy, related to the ways in which existing disability rights statutes can be applied to mitigate some of the forms of AI on people with disabilities. And I also do quite a bit of research, writing, and lots of other good stuff as well.
Great, thank you. So we have some proposed questions, but mainly because I'm assuming that the audience isn't going to jump in with questions right at the beginning. So if you have questions that you want to jump in with, please do. I'll just start with the first prepared question, I guess. What are some of the hidden costs associated with AI use by people with disabilities? Can you repeat the question? What are some of the hidden costs associated with AI use? Yes. I feel like there's been a lot of, so usually recently I just finished study where we're looking how it was the use of AI amongst people with disabilities broadly, right? And from that, I think there's a lot of flexibility facts that comes with engaging with technology, specifically in one way. One is the effort to disclose, right? Some people with disabilities may not want to be able to, may not want to disclose. However, mere engagement, so especially in the house, and I think when I learned talking about the therapy routines, there's complexity, collage, but like I would like to say, oh, I am a Black woman that has a child and can you do this for me, right? Rather than someone who just says, hey, do that, right? Because there's other things that the way it prepares for you going back, it'll be different. So, I think that's one, right? There's just extra effort that one has to do to mitigate with disabilities. There's also medicine security challenges that kind of go there. Anyone else want to jump in? You were telling me what you had something to say? No, I'm sorry. I was listening to you. But yeah, so one of the hidden costs for people with disabilities and all is the way that people are insisting that pre-existing services be replaced by AI without any validation of whether or not that person is actually suitable. And so they're paying the kind of both in finances and in efforts and in isolation when we begin replacing all of the disability infrastructure with technology that are largely unproven and confident accountability matters. And so an example of this is that disability resource centers refusing to provide no speakers anymore, forcing students to only use AI-generated transcripts with summary paper forms, which creates a negative content. And this function is fundamentally differently from the kind of social interaction that is good from a note taker. And really not meaning that people become respond. I mean that there's a co-learning that occurs when you're actually in a note taker that where those people benefit from that relationship. And now we're just doing it through different interaction. Okay. Clara?
Sure, I can jump in here quickly. I mean, to a certain extent, one of the things that I talk about a lot, both when we're talking about AI and when we're talking about people with disabilities, and we're talking about the ways in which AI and people with disabilities intersect, is are the concerns new, right? Meaning, are they novel to AI, specific to AI? The answer to that is typically no. And then secondarily are the issues specific to people with disabilities, right? And what I mean by that is that there are, to a certain extent, folks with disabilities are experiencing and at risk of some of the same hidden costs as people without disabilities. The thing is that a lot of those negative effects of AI are going to be felt significantly more for folks with disabilities, particularly for multiple marginalized people with disabilities. And by that I mean disabled people of color, disabled queer and trans people, etc. also important thing, I think, to really sort of like dive into and to talk about as a level setting, because a lot of the conversation around disability and AI is structured around this idea that disabled people actually somehow disproportionately benefit from AI. Um, when I think, in fact, the reality is that people with disabilities, and again, particularly most marginalized people with disabilities, are going to be the ones who, again, not necessarily at the hidden costs that they experience are solely being experienced by folks with disabilities. There are, low-income people of color, etc., who are experiencing those same costs, whether we're talking about environmental factors, discrimination in hiring, pretty much all discrimination in healthcare, and accessibility, being one that's more focused around folks with disabilities. But those things are being felt across the board. But again, folks with disabilities are experiencing those negative impacts disproportionately. And I think that counter narrative, as opposed to sort of buying into what appears to be sort of like the more mainstream idea that like these tools are for disabled people, and in fact they help disabled people quite a lot. I think it's really important that people with disabilities sort of counter that a little bit with the understanding that in fact the potential for harm is disproportionate.
This is Claire, just building on what Elise was saying. I'm coming off of a project on AI health study that clearly identified like 90 reported incidents. So my head is exploding with where to start, but one thing I want to highlight in terms of is the issue of pre-authorization and integration of AI and its pre-authorization for Medicare. So that's moving from Medicare Advantage into traditional Medicare in private states, including the state of Washington. And this is causing harm to older people who are disabled and have chronic conditions and need services or surgeries for pain. And it's extending their wait times or contributing to them not getting the services that they otherwise would receive with human decision making. I focus a lot in my work on the sort of growing imperative to kind of subject yourself to monitoring. So being older and in need of care increasingly means you're going to be put under some pressure to incorporate some kind of device in your home or track something and have that information go to other people. And, AI tools effectively increasing new forms of data capture regardless of the intention, and in practice it's objectively acting as evidence surveillance. So there are all kinds of consequences and implications for that for people, and it matters sort of who you are and what your context is and who or what entity is receiving that data. But data can coincide as a greater sense of data control over somebody's life, different aspects of somebody's life, because the knowledge about someone's personal life is a form of power. And so there are a lot of implications for power and the privacy and such. The idea that I have to, the idea that privacy is being important for privacy's sake, but privacy is wrapped up with and inextricably integrated and interdependent with other values that people tend to care about, like autonomy and trust and dignity and such. And so there's quite a bit at stake when we're thinking about inclusive forms of monitoring in what used to be sort of more intimate spaces. I'm not even talking about in long-term care settings, residential settings, where maybe AI cameras are now being placed and people might have great opportunities for informed consent, where that might be justifying newspapers department of staffing instead of solving the problem of understaffing. So you took it around that with them. Thank you for saying all of you. So, just as a counter-narrative to both the sort of AI good for people disabilities, but also taxes, is there anything that any of you are excited about this year, whether it is addressing those homes or spaces where AI is beneficial that you have to share? Okay. My answer yes is to all of these, right? So from the previous question, yes, all of these things are happening, and I think they're also talking to people with disabilities. It's been the kind of like I don't trust it, but I use it, right? And I think that's very important because it's showing that it's giving some sense of independence from type of sensitive
healthcare. But specifically, I'm excited about that comes with a lot of like exclamation marks because it's by far the biggest places where we have a lot of security, a lot of a lot of care needs to be happening in that space, right? And I think that this has been a space where a lot of confusion has been for a lot of communities, and we can use AI to support and understanding to bring in more information for those communities. So yeah, that's one of the points I'm excited about AI. However, it is kind of scary at the same time how AI is going to pursue it, right? Because we're not saying that, yes, AI would help. I think that's also that people are just learning, and people without specific insight and access to how one should use and how one can engage with the person. So, yeah. Very well.
Awesome. That was answering exactly, what do we mean when we say AI? But one of the big reasons why I found it very rare to give a really very like what AI can do if we don't have any idea what we're talking about in the same. So I heard very few good things about growth and development and initiative any kind of development and the thing. But the other kind of things that get called out do have over time. These things are now also the things that have been doing them for so much longer. So, computer vision and signal processing, these are AI. Probably not now, probably have like 10 years of looking at it. But anyway, these are things that we are already using in adult technologies, including adult message technologies for better and worse. But the things about technology in general I'm excited about are the subversive things that are not coming out of mainstream industry. And these are basically, hacker and thinker and local person. The more that we make it possible for people to control and have full sovereignty over their technology, the better and more excited I can be because anyone can be careful. Because capitalism suddenly we kind of lack of a total paradigm, right? So the reason why we have to have all these exclamation points in our brain around AI and medicine is because we're being thrown into the situation very chaotic kind of just around the attention to detail or because the outline is not there, but all of them are going to look people. So I'm really only interested in the kinds of autonomous and self-directed control over the technologies that people can integrate into their lives and also have constant control over not just things you will do it for when you get it, who gets to see it, and that's all kind of the fact that most consumer technologies do not give us access. So I'm excited about the potential of technology because I'm not actually anti-technology person, but we don't currently have the kind of infrastructure or systems to give us that in the future. So we can put it together, and if you can involve breaking a law, it's fine. And rather than those goals, please, thank you for me.
No, because what I'm going to do is actually I'm gonna talk about it a little bit. I think the thing that I am most, I don't know whether you want to say excited about it, whether I would say it's just follows, is that I've been leading this project for 3 years, and I've been doing disability work for 1 day or another for 10 years, and I've been doing tech work for about 7. And in that time, like doing disability, doing tech, doing disability tech, there has been just a real like commitment from a lot of really, really people to continue to like put out this work and to remain sort of unfazed in doing this work, even as AI becomes more mainstream, even as the rhetoric that companies sort of seem to become stronger of like everyone who's using AI is going to be left behind and that sort of thing. The work of my colleagues is really just put out in the book. My colleague Damien Cox's Williams does both in academia, the technology projects and working with the people with disabilities is doing incredible work on this. Kind of the lead on technical justice is doing incredible work on this. Like, there are so many people in academia that are society in the legal space that are really putting thought into ways to do this work in this country to people with disabilities, regardless of the ways in which the tech side has been sort of like moving that purposely. And I think that that is something that continues to grow the work that I do and to be exciting because I get to work with really smart people.
And that's all okay, that's all I see. Okay, there's some idea about that. I agree. Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on your comments about carelessness and just give a concrete example of that because I think a lot of times people say, oh, the policy, the regulation is in place, this is the program, what are we doing in the meantime, and so on. But I think there's a lot we can do to be attentive, and just to bring it home to the youth life, I had a student of mine raising a passion, a problem that he would call Husky Helpline, people call Husky Helpline, when she explained when people were like, hit on ADHD, for example, and to talk to somebody, and she said she was shocked with all the good influences that generally they always use to support record keeping, yada yada. I'm not going to make that script, but I did call it to confirm, and trying to providers who don't want it. And then there's times that you get the provider doesn't bring it up, it's up to you to grab, when you're in a moment of having a health crisis potentially, a student is being leaned on to sort of assert their preferences for whether or not they analysis to capture some sort of data, specific data. And so, she was really worried that this was going to cause students to hang up and not use it. She thought that she actually got really great data when she got to the person. And it was really nice there. So all students got and I agreed. And I think for one preparing that, who stands and talks with the company who does that? Who's heard about this thing and are we sort of waiting what comes out or what's going to change? So just one example, I think. But because this is what we're talking about positive uses, I just want to highlight, I heard River Benjamin once talk about a program, and I cannot remember the name of what they were doing with, but they were looking at addressing the problem of medical racism at the moment when at the medical academy providers interacting with a patient and maybe using AI to sort of generate a plan to like plan the patient request. So those things, X% of this population seems to be overlooked at pain, or not supposed to be pain, etc. This is the kind of redirect those interactions, especially with the most of those things happen. I think that is a really neat and transformed issue for the agency in casual and medical because of ableism. So I think creative things like that might be interesting. I also think there's a lot of concepts that specifically with learning within STEM technologies, especially for coordination work. Just take a minute for questions from the audience, and I think people could prepare questions. Hello, I'm Donald Rassani. The question I have is, what work needs to be done still regarding AI governance and to protect undocumented people of color? Because that's really hard. I'm thinking about surveillance and their access to private data. So any of y'all could speak on that, I'd appreciate it. I don't know which hotels might have experience pertinent to this, so please jump in if you do. So, this is where we see the collision between government agents and different interests. We see about lots potentially leaking data to support ISIS activities, hunting down people. And, this is kind of this is one of the problems that I get so much resistance. This is where people use the disability diversion the most. So when you're totally cooking, the way that these techniques are enabling mass surveillance and disproportionate funding against very vulnerable communities, you get that they're so helpful to disabled people. That idea that we mentioned earlier that like somehow disabled people are going to benefit the most from these technologies. And then when you tell a story like that, then the tendency tends to be to think that when you can't possibly put it in something that's going to help this pitiable population of people, you're now no longer able to find any kind of argument. That's why I call it the disability diversion. It like completely erases and consumes any kind of judgment and allows you to like a literal knowledge trick. Right? And so this is why I fight so much about what I do. These technologies can be useful to disabled people. And why I get in so many fights with other disabled people about, how useful these technologies really are and whether it's worth it. And worth it being worth the harm to others. That's where we get into some trouble with, the number of disabled advocates that tend to be overwhelmingly white and don't think about the intersectional problems and are more interested in whether or not they can go to the grocery store alone than is education go to the grocery store at all without an internship. And that's kind of how I feel like that and now in some of those.
And this is how I am. I'll say a little more just not necessarily specific to the question, but kind of like on what we're talking about. I've written on this too, real causes of disability diversion. I've talked about it in Code and Divorce. It's the same thing, right? Like this idea that you can use disability as a way to prevent your racism, right? And what this does, it actually, at the end of the day, scapegoats people with disabilities, right? When things like inevitably go wrong. But secondarily, it also ignores that people with disabilities are everywhere, right? And so if you care about people with disabilities, it also means caring about undocumented people with disabilities. Right? It means about caring about low-income people with disabilities who are affected by AI in different ways, right? And so this is kind of like, it's almost like a philosophical answer to what is a very concrete question. But I think it's really important, right? I don't do a ton I don't necessarily have like a ton of concrete recommendations, but I do think that Ray's point is really important, and I wanted to kind of just preview into it a little bit more.
And I can just add for those of you who are local to Seattle, we have a really wonderful expert on this topic in the political science department, and Bree Markham is assistant professor there who studies this really directly. I think for media does a great job reporting on these issues. Tech policy press the Sunday, so I know I recently listened to some interesting discussions with attorneys about what can be done about this issue that you're raising. I think they were really attentive to the role of following data right now is important, not allowing, Medicaid data, for example, claims data to get searched, and then go look for fertility data, because that actually increasing, it creates vulnerability for people. Also thinking about, just in my world, working with some data, people living mixed families and have extra complaints potentially about some of the technologies coming being used for care for that purpose because they're concerned about potentially using those data and data not being secure. Thanks for that question. Really important topic. Are there any questions coming in? Have some. We do have some questions, so I was just going to read those. And first of all, there's a couple of questions for how has moving in AI account print was student mental health. And there was a question to share number of people and organizations that are sort of about to look up a lot of calling to hear about whether it's donor, noted Damian G. Williams, disability rights and technology policy, and then Alana shared PD's website. Oh, I'm clear. Is Canadian Court Benefit Board and Court Justice. We will also movies on it with I just wanted to bring that to you. We're going to question it. We're going to jump in with one. Okay, very good. Generative AI, like new predictive technology, is error-prone. In accessibility context, discovering errors may be inaccessible. What can disabled people who are using AI do to manage this concern? I'm starting with again. Too late. So this has a lot to do with things that people claim generative AI can do, like describe images and other ways of giving people information about the world around them through sensory processes that they may not have. And the inaccessible aspect is like you don't actually have the capacity to check whether or not it told you this is an apple and it's actually an orange. So, one thing that people do about that is a little bit wild. It's like there's actually that's the whole problem is that there's a logic gap. Like, and you are trying to use the generative AI system to tell you information about the world that is information that you fundamentally cannot receive in any other way, and therefore cannot check for whether or not it's lying to you, then you're tricked. So, I don't want, I always just so nervous that somebody's going to think I'm bullying somebody. But there was a person recently on YouTube who talked about being given a set of narrow glasses and how transformative she thought that they would be for the blind community. And one of the things that she said was, my glasses apologize to me when they're wrong, and they say that they will improve in the future. I believe my glasses. And if I had one piece of advice for different people using technologies of any kind, it's that you're never ever supposed to believe your glasses. You're never supposed to believe a technology that was handed to you by a company with interests that are fundamentally at odds with you as a human being and your community of people. Like, trust but verify, right? But then what happens if you literally can't verify? Well, now you need proof. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you rely on something that you cannot trust, and then deciding that the solution to that is to just trust it is dangerous. Please don't. That's my life. It is dangerous. I agree. But however, I feel like there is some. We have to stick on the way that we are creating the conversation, right? I think for what is AIoT, right? Actually learning what the technologies, what these things are doing, what's happening, but who's going out into community and actually requesting this information with them? Who's actually partnering? No, that isn't what it's actually doing. It doesn't actually know what it's saying. It's doing whatever. That was definitely my biggest news about one, yeah, making sure that you don't fully rely on technology. However, some people are actually using it. Here's a place to rely on because that is quote unquote always. And and so I feel like in those instances, how do you work with them to navigate other spaces, right? So if they're not, if they don't use those many classes, what else can you do? How can you guide them to use other things? I think that's specifically where I am in a lot of these conversations. And I know this is technology literacy because
even on the base level of technology, a lot of communities, and I'm not talking just disabled, a lot of communities do not know the technology, what's going on behind the scenes in technology. We do, some do, but not all of us. So it's important that we actually discuss that and have a conversation in the community.
Speaking of the community, very interesting background. Many of them quite at homes. Went through also aspects of examining ourselves because people with disabilities or working with people with disabilities, just like other communities, we have to go into the communities and say, can you work with me to make sure that our work can be, your work can be advanced in our community. I'm not saying screwing you because they didn't have spaces to be able to do that fast. I've been actually connecting with other people who are on LinkedIn and oh, well, they want this company didn't have what I needed. And like looking at our student and blah, blah, blah. No. If you want them to actually want to work with us, we're going to have to figure out how do you connect with those organizations as a whole. These are things that are lacking. And if you don't have the funds for it, because most of the time that's why they don't add in things, because if you can add in these things, can we help you find the funds to ensure that our community will do well? And I think that is the thing of working hand in hand with us, technology, and also different organizations. I think that's the thing that we have to continue to work on ourselves and like I'm not saying that we're being a victim, but making sure that we're able to, with what we have, play the right card for what we have and actually extend and hang out and work with other organizations to get the help that we need. Especially when it comes to it's our community and it's our way of making sure that we can actually navigate the actual planning for everyday life. So. Thanks, Ben. A great addition. And because we're going to keep on the question, I'm going to new and there's something I want to say or whatever, but I don't know if it'll come up again. So I'm going to go ahead and say it. And then I would need to do this spiel to make sure that people are not being harmed by the conversation. And that is that I do not, and I don't think anybody should necessarily condemn individual choices to use these technologies given that they may have found a way to use their technology to involve a system that is designed against them, right? So while I am sad that I see so many neurodivergent people feel that the LLM is helping them communicate with others more effectively, I'm not condemning them for all of the things that I'm angry at the LLM companies for, right? If there is a young person who is getting used to the meta glasses, even though there are so many problems with meta and their behavior, I'm not condemning that individual person because they don't have other supports to help them do things that they need and the lives that are working for them, right? Like we have to be angry at the right people, and we should never be angry at each other. There's that sort of phrase about when the Lord of the land forces everyone to stand in the rain, your enemy is not the man who will wear a hat. Right? Like, it's not that. But at the same time, many of the reasons why people are turning to these tools are because we are ourselves buying the narrative that it is our responsibility, disabled or not, to become fully self-sufficient, independent people. And that we can turn away from the supports we get from each other and use these supports that are being sold to us because that makes us a single individual person and that is somehow better. And so I do want more people to question their motivations when they are using these technologies, when they feel that it is an act of survival to really interrogate whether or not the way that another way to survive that actually keeps us all to get connected to each other rather than isolating and alienating us, which is what these technologies are designed for and what these temporary breaks mean.
Yeah, sorry, I want to expand on kind of what you were saying a little bit because I can focus on that too. Um, in my work, one of the things that I think about and that I talk about a lot is that it's not necessarily my interest or my role to tell a disabled person what they should or shouldn't use, right? Um, Partially because people with disabilities have historically been early adopters of technology. People with disabilities historically have taken technologies that were not built for us and MacGyvered them into things that are useful for us. Partly because we live in an ableist and inaccessible world, and if these are the things that we do so that we can live independently or, move through the world in ways that are easier and inclusive or anything like that, then I don't believe that it's supposed of me, like, as a disabled person, as an advocate, as a policy person, as a lawyer, whatever, to make assertions on that. What I do believe is that the product can be better, right? I don't think it's necessary, and the governance can be better, right? The tech and the tech policy are both separate and interrelated things. It is not, as an example, for me to say, like, I don't think that a blind or vision person should use medical, right? But I do believe that it is for me to say, I believe that Meta should make glasses that are more privacy protected. I believe that those glasses can be made in ways that are still useful to people as an assistive technology, even while recognizing that they were not built as an assistive technology, in ways that are more privacy protected for users and for coverage, right? And then secondarily, to say, and I believe that we can have better privacy legislation that would mitigate some privacy-related harms that people with undiagnosed disabilities face when they interact with technologies, right? So it is never to say, like, people with disabilities should have studied using a particular tools. It is to say the people who are making these tools should do it right and make it better because it's too important not to.
I have a cool follow-up question in my comments as well. I looked at in the meantime, right, when Meta isn't focused on the communities, unfortunately, how do you support the communities who own the technology? Do you have something about it?
I can start there. I do, right? And so there's a few different things. So, like, as an example, one of these things is, and going back to the principles of disability justice, right? One of the principles of disability justice, if we're not familiar with the 10 principles, is like cross-disability solidarity, right? And so one of the things that you can do if you're a person with a disability and you want to engage in cross-disability solidarity and supportive of people who are using these tools, you can, let's say, provide recommendations as to user-facing ways in the meantime where you're either working to build better products and doing company advocacy or doing policy advocacy, user-generated and with user-controlled ways to make the experience better, more privacy protected, less making it legal harm, etc. Right? And so an example that I would give there is one of the recommendations that I put on a report 2 years ago, and I think that's the 2024 election, talking about misinformation from chatbots on voting with a disability. And the recommendation was not, people with disabilities should never use ChatGPT. But the recommendation was you shouldn't consider ChatGPT or any large language model to be a reliable source. You can use it as a starting point. You can use it to give you other resources and other sources. But because hallucinations are inherent to functioning large language models, because there's a whole bunch of incorrect data, because the data issued with disabilities specifically are foundational in ways that mean that there's a ton of incorrect, underrepresented, non-inclusive data that comes out of these large language models about disability, that you do so carefully, right? And the interesting thing about making recommendations like this is, and maybe I'm dating myself, but when I was, in elementary school, middle school, high school, etc., at college, not for nothing, right? The conversation around Wikipedia was like, use it as a way to get other sources. But recognize that because anyone can go in and edit it, that things in there might not be right, right? And for whatever reason, that recommendation wasn't so controversial when we were talking about Wikipedia. Um, and when you make the same recommendation on Dropbox, it's quite friendly because it's quite controversial, right? Another example I give about transcription solidarity is you can be someone who, if you want to, and if you're able to, who can sort of cross-reference and check these sorts of things. And, you can talk about these tools and the ways in which they impact you, your disabilities, with people who are using them for their disabilities, right? Um, and this goes back to something like I said very early on. Like, one of the things we have to ask is whether these issues are inherent and novel to AI or whether they're not. Disability is an inherently no marginalized group in Marlin. People with disabilities are an incredibly diversified group, right? Um, People with different disabilities experience disability differently, they experience technology differently, and they also experience the systems in which these technologies are being integrated differently, right? And so part of this is like really embracing a mindset of like this again, like cross disability solidarity, um, and a framing that recognizes again that it is not sort of for us to, as Rita said, like fight with our friends, but to push for better technology to be used from the beginning.
And we also have different populations. So when I'm hanging out with my mother, then I would not know the kids until like people that I don't know. But if I'm in a good relationship with somebody and I'm doing something that I think is not only hurting them, but very likely is hurting other people, then I can say, look, let's find another solution together. I will support you because this is not a good thing to be doing. Like, that's a conversation that we can have with the people that we are actually in a relationship with. But me, as like a semi-public figure, it's not going to be like, y'all are all doing it wrong, because that is a ridiculous take. So we can't go with our friends and we should. Nicely. With both.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things for me about accessibility is the way in AI, is the way in which I can use AI to generate deterministic solutions to problems, like writing code that can do a thing that there wasn't a tool to do before. And I think it's an interesting space because on the one hand, there's a million AI vectors that we all use, and I feel like we are going to end up in a world with video streaming where you have to pay for all of them or not, but then like get one piece of the picture. And also if we can generate things that are functional that don't depend on all of the errors that AI can make, we have changed something that is actually important in the world somehow. So I guess I'm just curious about your take on that.
I'm trying to find a little transcript so I can actually remind myself of the way you were asking. So
I can probably repeat it more simply, which is that I think that there is a risk that we end up in a world where we can't afford to use AI to do all the things we want to do if we only use AI to generate things. But if we use it to create things that can run without AI, then we've changed what's in the world in a way that I think is really powerful. And so AI coding being an example of that.
So one of the things that if I could go back and answer what I'm most excited about, I was kind of trying to get there, but I was just like, well, I'm actually kind of obsessed with the idea of what is the lowest solution to these problems. Like, I'm very fascinated by the idea of like the least smart home, and this idea that everything has to be in the cloud is like a risk that we're soldiers, and that's why I kind of mentioned studying the internet, but like we could return back to having lower tech solutions. We got to have the right to record or do any of this, which is a major problem for the disability community anyway, because we don't have the right to record and also assistive equipment, and it's a major problem. Like being able to actually be the builders and the designers is a major part of this problem. And fascinatingly, is one of those lies that was sold to us that all of this cloud computing and all of these 3D printers and things we want to democratize making. But that did not actually happen because they're also simultaneously different ones who you can't not coach another one's over, and that's terrifying. And like, they've systematically defunded education, and you kind of learn computer science in high school, but not really. And like, we don't actually learn stuff. We learn the surface of something so that we think we know what we're doing, but we don't for the kid. No sense. I think about how my students no longer know what a file hierarchy is. And like they know less about computers than the courses before them, and as I'm saying, worse and worse, the worse one is actually expanding across all problems, and it's just like we made everything frictionless, and then it actually broke us. Like, it's okay for things to be a little bit hard to use, because then you know what they're doing. And the frictionlessness is especially with everything being easier. Usability has become a thing. Like, I'm not saying that things should be actually difficult for everybody should maybe Linux. I'm saying, like, we've actually sacrificed something in understanding how things work for this very glossy, streamlined idea of usability that is actually just systems doing things for us, just so we know what we can, or even have any desires at all. We don't even have to think about what to look for, because the algorithm will give us the content that it thinks we want, and we're satisfied with the recommendation.
Hi, I'm John Barrett, professor in computer science at the next panel. I hope you experience a lot. Really enjoying this discussion, but thank you all to the panelists, remote and physically present. I have a extreme existence of being an optimist, and that's led me sort of here. And I'd say a few things. One, we're talking a lot about, I think, existential questions, philosophical questions about the humanity that we all want to be a part of, community and care and the underlying fundamental values. Those things are so important, and I don't have good answers to them. I do want to come back to my own perspective and experience in product and design. And I note that we don't have that representation on the panel today. We don't have people who are actively building these foundation models. We don't have somebody from Google or Amazon speak today on this panel. And my experience is a good portion of being at Google last year on sabbatical. And I would say that I think we'll agree with you all. But it's not as if they lack that perspective, they lack that love, they lack that care. And there are many people there that are trying to work on these same things. And so I just wanted to offer that as a perspective, and that, for example, Meta, which I do believe we should be criticizing, and I think it's for sort of surveillance capitalism, does erode a number of things we care about. But they have worked with the Meta eyeglasses, which work with human eyes throughout that entire experience. So I think trying the best to engage with leaders and people with blindness, low vision acquired in general, and using the systems to give them values, new opportunities, and new innovations. I realize we're not pouring dangerously close to while it's helping people this disability diversion, but I'm not trying to offer it as a total counter. I'm just saying, like, there are a lot of really good people working in these companies that also have disability that are creating, I think, really important innovations that allow people to do things that they could have otherwise not done 10 years ago. Whether or not that's using foundation models or not, many of the things they're doing on like voiceover and image descriptions and other things are using, foundation models. So anyways, I told you I was an optimist. I just wanted to offer that today because I'm a computer scientist, but I do believe fundamentally in innovation.
Thank you. This is actually important because you lead me to the ability to make the distinction between the people that work at a company and the company itself. Yes, there are many people that are working for the company that are deeply invested in the business and the basic, including just technology. They are often responsible for doing everything and solving mechanisms of the company itself. That's not an inevitable constraint. Unfortunately, what we have to do to get past that is these good people at these companies need to unionize. They need to get to control these companies. These companies are being driven by one or two sociopathic people. And the only way out of that is unionizing. And so this is, yes, all of these people working at these companies should, many of the people working at these companies have big hearts. And they're part of manifesting their favorite is actually to fight the company I work for. Go ahead, Paul.
Very interesting. I think one of them is we need to be careful not to personify problems or blame it on people when it's the nature of the technology itself. Okay? So fire is naturally destructive. We can use it in a constructive way, but it doesn't mean that anybody who creates a company that uses fire as part of it and it causes something to burn down, it's the company to burn out. It's just like this is AI is very emotional. It could be a very fearful feeling stuff, very monster, and that's what we're mostly worried about. So that's the first time is that be careful that we don't blame things on people that are actually the nature of the technology. Now, we can say that they didn't take proper precautions, but that's one thing. A second thing is that you have all these evil companies that care about nothing but profit, and they're owned by people who don't care about anything but profit. And I would like to point out that almost all of those people in this room are those people. How many people here own stocks? How many people have a pension? How many people would like to have a stock or like to have a pension? And when you do, and you get other people to run that pension fund, that will not make money for you for your retirement, but just do good things with the money, or you want enough people that will give you a good pension, a good return. And this is the problem. There are some portfolio ways that you can invest in that try to invest in companies that do things better than others. But we need to keep a little bit in mind that a lot of these companies are publicly traded and so they're owned by all of our pension funds and everything else. The nature of the company, from year to earlier, is the nature of the company is to make money and to look out after its shareholders. I mean, that's what people are hired to do. So we need to, as we work on this, remember that relying on a company to take care of us or to do something other than what is a fiduciary business is, which is to profit, is a mistake. So we need to keep in mind that A, the technology we're dealing with here is really powerful but dangerous, and B, that we are going to have to think of how to do things. Inside companies we find great people, but the company itself may be driven by what its owners ask it to be driven by, and that's us. So, again, don't look to the companies to preserve us. We have to look to some other mechanism to build in the safeguards and stuff that bring it into play.
I just want to jump in and say, first of all, I just want to know that as being accountability, so because this meeting has not closed. And secondly, I guess I want to add a pitch to that the technology that we're talking about can be doing good for some people. And we have many projects in field that are using AI to do things that were not possible before that I think are outstanding. And sometimes, many times, those same technologies can be used for harm. And so I think the fact that they are needed for disabled people shouldn't stop us from trying to address those harms. Which maybe gets back to what your point rule about disability isn't an excuse to not do things right. But I also think that we should be continuing to look at these opportunities for innovation and thinking about what we can do to do things that are outstanding, that can let somebody, solve a problem that nobody cared about before, or didn't think about before, or couldn't do in the same way before, find new opportunities because of that. That, to me, is the necessarily something that isolates people. It's not necessarily something that takes something away as well if we do it right, even while these other concerns are also essential to consider. Can I add something? Just in response to the previous comment, this program is just for a moment that took us through the process promoting the public interest, obviously. I think media has a role there, and research is difficult to rate. But, generally, these are public interest bankers, and the privacy law Daniel Solomon has said, I don't believe a folk procurement credit. And also, that's relevant for this average that some of their studies that are showing outcomes. So, of course, the tech industry is going to align their practices with profit, which is going to be unfettered data collection, but we say is inappropriate. So, it's the people we have elected to make our interest who we have to hold accountable. So, policymakers really, people talk about papers and easy scapegoat, but what about the policymakers who are really inappropriate targets who haven't questioned these issues? And as a community, I've also really good space where, we are protected from the noise of the private imperative in terms of being able to identify harms and articulate harms and issues and concerns and raise attention and keep some of the important issues that are important in the public sector.
This is Ariana. I also want to just kind of jump in here too. This for the last kind of a little bit before that, just about the topic of companies in general, right? I think that what my colleagues in the panel are saying this far is correct, right? Both are really saying that you're really great people at the company. Part of these serious things is in direct to company advocacy. And that means talking to the big four media platforms, it means talking to the small corporate technology startups, right? About how to build technologies better than we do today. That's kind of my dialogue, and I do it in good faith, right? And first, because I believe that the people I'm talking to genuinely care about things. That their ability to do something is limited by the structure in which they exist is, I think, almost goes without saying, right? However, right? So I'll keep on to this. Secondarily, right, what my prayer is saying, it is not to say that I believe, even as I'm saying that one of my theories of change, one of my theories of change is company advocacy. It is not to say that I want people with disabilities or anyone who is good, really, to say, like, tech company saving tech company, right? Like, that is not in my opinion, a really wise strategy. At the end of the day, we take care of us, right? And that's why one of the things that I'm working on as a panelist and my work in general is like thinking about disability justice, leaning into cross-disability advocacy, thinking about us as a community who are facing challenges that may or may not be nothing, but that we understand how to tackle challenges together as a community. The disability community has gotten incredible legislation in the United States because we organize, because we know how to do that, right? We take care of us. That does not occur because we went to a company to help us, right? There were multiple movers of advocacy that led to something like the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, right? And all possess multiple movers and multifaceted advocacy strategy. But at the end of the day, the idea is not to outsource to private companies, which should be done through a regulatory or policy or organizing scheme, right? I think all of that is important. I want to round this a little bit. Again, I'm thinking about disability justice, but I want to think a little bit about like the philosophical nature of it. And maybe I myself am going to sound like the optimist and all this, and maybe even a Pollyanna, right? I believe that companies can make profit and actually not do all the work all the time, right? And I do believe when we're thinking about sort of like the philosophy of it, right? There's a part of philosopher named Shannon who writes about like when we owe to each other, right? Like the idea of owing to each other things that we can do in good faith, right? I don't necessarily believe that like working with companies to build better technologies is important and incompatible with building technologies that are less harmful to disabled people. I think that the whole theory of inclusive design is that you can build products that are good for disabled people and that are like also good for other people, and not for nothing. Again, I think step back from a philosophical perspective, it's worth questioning why do we have to do that? Why is it not enough to just build products that are good for disabled people? Inclusive design has been a thing for a long time. It has proven itself to be useful, right? At least in physical spaces, I believe in digital spaces too. Like, I do think that there are like some elements and areas of overlap here, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like they have a duty to shareholders to make a bunch of money. You have a duty to community, and those two things can never ever overlap ever. Because I think we have to think about power and power dynamics and power differentials, and I'm not willing to give that when I'm in that space.
Thank you so much. I think that, people in the crew work together and use all the levers that we have to improve disabled lives. Sounds like a good one to me. And I'm getting the big T time to have on. So I think that's the note we might have to end on. Thank you to my co-panelists for bringing us the pictures of us.